let's watch a clip of the indent of NOS Journaal made by Carlo and Stefan. You have been collaborating with Carlo Delbosq. Yeah. And we have him here to make some questions about you too. So, wonderful. Carlo? Yeah. Yes, can you join us? Hi. Hi. How are you? So, Carlo is a graphic designer and director, so you are not in the same field. Carlo, how did you start collaborating with Stefan?
It goes back to the 80s. In 80, I think it must be 84, 85. I think 84. I was working at NOS, National Broadcast Company. We worked in a room. I worked with a room with two other designers, and one of them was Ron van Roon. And in those days, it was like a fairy ground to work there. You could do anything. Anything was possible to do. And we talked a lot, and we became friends, and then on one of his parties, I met Stefan. And we talked I remember the first time I met Stefan, we could talk about any kind of music, from Jobim, Antonio Carlos Jobim from Brazil, to Frank Sinatra, to Sakamoto, to whatever, or, new wave. And I never met a guy like that, which I like the same kind of music, but I never met a guy who had the same kind of interest in music. That's how it started, to be just friends and nice to talk with. And later on, he worked for this other guy. He did some intros for television programs. And then in 87, I had the assignment to do the news, the Dutch news. And that, I think, it's one of the most important jobs you can do in my profession. It's like designing the money, for example. It's something like that. So I thought, okay, and I was art director for this job. So we had to change that was my idea, to change the whole system of how to bring the news. Because before it was very simple. You had a wooden background with I think somebody with hands did change the cards, the photographs, they taped on it. The weather guy was standing in front of a real map. And it's really very primitive in those days, in 86. And when we start, I went to the US a lot of time. I went to the BBC and I saw what they did. And then I introduced a more digital kind of imaging, but that's a lot of changing inside the news. So I thought, okay, I met this guy, and he was so free of mind, without borders, open-minded. So I thought, I think he can do that. And we started talking about it, and yeah, that's how it started.
And for me, I'm not a musician, so for me, putting emotions in music is already a challenge. And taking this to the other level, which is picking up a logo or a concept of a company and convert it to music seems something so difficult. How does one start it? How does it go, the creative process of it?
Well, the old way of working between the two, audio and vision, was ever since Charlie Chaplin, was that they were actually waiting on each other to start, and we, as Carlo just said, were not only interested in realizing a finished product, but also to revisit, right, the method of how you come to product or creation. So we decided that we should experiment a little with how you work together. The way we tried to do that was to not present each other with a finished creation of your own discipline and then drop it off to the other guy and then he'll see what he'll do to it, or vice versa. So we wanted to work in parallel and dare to be vulnerable in saying, you can only hear a little bit and I can see a little bit, and is that already sort of having an intrinsic relationship? And with intrinsic, I mean that we wanted it to have a deeper linkage between vision and sound than just gluing them together like, you know, like a turkey sandwich. Yeah.
So you didn't make the music for an ident, but you sort of collaborative created the audiovisual ident.
Eventually you have to produce sound and imagery, but what I liked with Carlo was that you open up the dialogue of collaboration earlier on in the timeline of the process, meaning that we also decided to do actually a verbal jam session in only seeing what is the conceptual starting point of us together, instead of you do each in a different room and then you confront each other with something finished already. At the conceptual stage, you start the collaboration between the two disciplines, instead of only in the productional, let alone the post-productional moment.
But once you have this concept and you have discussed the concept of what it should be, how do you then make that translation to creativity? And how do you make that choice?
It goes, like Stefan says, step by step. So it's going like a ping pong from first a little bit of that, then he adds a little bit of that. And we talk about taste, showing things like what's going on in the world. The leader of the BBC, for example, how do they do it? Music of Sakamoto, how does that sound? You know, can be anything. It's a kind of cooking, like cooking.
But still you refer to the music you know, the music you're inspired by. So you have
It doesn't have to.
No. It could also be music you really dislike, and then see what you sort of do inventorize where all the pitfalls may lie, and that's the added value of a earlier collaboration in the conceptual stages, where you already decide upon the general aesthetic, and the general aesthetical direction is, let's say, A, and naturally B music wouldn't fit with an A aesthetic. So it makes it easier, because when you don't have the intense collaboration in the beginning, then actually it's applied art and it's paid for by a client. You risk also within the budget even and the time of production that you're too late in realizing, this isn't the right direction we went in together. So it's better to crystallize from earlier on to also protect the customer for it's too late conclusions.
Then you are too late. And you sometimes make very eclectic choices, or the result is a mix of not only a mix of harmony and melody, but even a mix of styles and genres. And how do you convince a client for these kind of daring choices? Because you just mentioned, should it sound like a BBC? I imagine that the Dutch NOS would say, we want something like the BBC.
No, they don't ask that.
Okay, but maybe they go for a safe choice. How do you?
Yes,
How do
that's
you
a big,
push that?
big argument. You have to argue with them.
And in the beginning, of this kind of work, which, as Carlos said, it wasn't institutionalized, this type of work, in that period of time, in the Dutch TV industry. So we had to find out through practicing. But what happened was, earlier on, a musician had nothing to say. so the art director or the graphic designer had to both represent the visual side of things and the audio side of things. So Carlo often had to assume the task of defending musical choices, and that was the hierarchy at the time.
And what happened if you have the perfect thing and the perfect sound and the client hates it?
Yeah.
How did you go after it? Like, do you do everything back again? Do you try to do a reshape and send it again to see if it sticks? How did it go?
Well, in the 70s, 80s, there was more freedom, as I referred to earlier on in the conversation, that you were allowed more freedom, but at the same time, people's expectations were very, very premeditated. So it was hard to bring on some innovation there. However, they didn't particularly like being challenged, but in the end, when they saw the benefits of that, they sort of grew and accustomed to it and had a new addiction. They wanted more of that. So the whole methodology changed over time.
So now it's all different. It must be different. It must be more different than the other, right?
Yeah, but today, to jump to this year, this is something we didn't experience together, but I experienced on my own maybe a year ago something. I was with a Dutch broadcaster, and exactly what we're talking about here happened there, except the outcome was rather radically back to where we started, before we started even. Namely, the client said, look, we don't want something different. We want the same as our competition. So the new marketing, I thought, driving back home, I thought, that's weird. So today's marketing is about identifying yourself with the person you fight a battle for airtime against. It's silly.
So can you say that when you work together on, for example, the NOS or other KRO ident, which was very modern at that time, was there more room for your personal musical identity?
Because, the whole thing is, at that time, electronic music was just being introduced big time in pop music, and usually what happens is that media music is following that trend of what's happening in the pop charts. We thought, let's break with that tradition and think of what emotes people best. And at that time, there was a film being the #1 film, The Last Emperor, in Dutch cinema around Christmas time, and that was a #1 film in the country. And the music to that, by colleague Sakamoto, was orchestral. And orchestral at that time was almost dead. That was just not hip or trendy. But we thought, no, hold on, he's right. And let's project this school of thought of his into TV identity. And that's why we did what we did with a full orchestra.
It's a nice anecdote to explain that Stefan, the music, I think you started with an Atari computer.
Yeah.
You know, a very small system at home, and we listened, we talked, we discussed about this tune, and I had computer graphics, a lot of people in the studio. It was a big project. It cost in that time 1 million guilders, and that was very expensive to make. But then we were like children in playing together with this thing, you know, and then Stefan had the tune, and it was beautiful already on this computer, and he organized a trip to London to, I think, played by the Royal
Philharmonic Orchestra.
Wow.
So I never will forget that we were in the studio. It was the CTI studio, CTS, where the James Bond movies are done, and we, like children, sitting in the control room, Stefan with his computer, and we see this 40 people orchestra sitting there. And I never will forget that they played the first time his tune. It was really chicken skin. It was incredible.
Yeah, it was.
And it was beautiful. And I think it was never done like that before for Dutch TV, something like this.
How did you deal with technical boundaries?
Well, indeed, when you think of production today, we have with each other gained a lot of ease by having a similar interface on your computer screen. If it's either video or audio, it's a timeline and a start and a stop, etc. Multi-layering, it's all become compatible now. At the time, it wasn't at all. So the Atari computer, you know, like a game computer at the time, was having a bit of a rough resolution also, technically speaking. However, the orchestra playing there, remember, was exactly, in the very first time they played, it was exactly synchronizing with the level metering in the game computer, which wasn't our expertise. It was their wonderful musicality to be able to do it that way. You know, imagine that the first time. And so the milliseconds of precision they could produce in their performance made it automatically synchronizing well with the imagery of Carlo. But that was all with detours and you know.
You know, in those days, you know, he learned me. We learned from each other because I was, if I did something like this, animation or whatever, I had a film table and with frames, and I had the music, and it was frame by frame, 25 frames in 1 second. That was my thing. But he teach me in one frame there are 100 points in sound.
Yeah, sound has a more fine resolution.
And that's, you know, that was new and so we computer graphics was never done like this before, like 3D animation. One frame has to calculate for sometimes 2 hours, only one frame. And then it took weeks for the whole animation to calculate, and then you could see the results, you know. So it's all improvising before the result was showing, also with the music.